So, do you support the return of the elected school board for governance of the St. Louis public school system? And what changes would you advocate to improve our public schools?
So yes, I would support an elected school board. I think that with elections come accountability, and I think that ultimately in the system that we're in, the more people that work towards elections, the more likelihood there is that there's accountability to the voters in the end product that gets put out by people in positions of power. As far as improving the schools, it's a really tricky avenue for the Board of Aldermen to really improve the schools, because I think a lot of that needs to be done in Jefferson City with the way that we apportion taxes. Our schools are funded on property taxes, and that has caused a real issue where poorer neighborhoods have less funding for their schools, and it creates kind of a cycle of poverty, essentially. I think that one thing that the board can be mindful of and should absolutely work towards is better accountability on TIFs for projects, tax increment financing. We have been leaving a lot of money on the table with TIFs. We've essentially handed developers ways to not pay taxes for 5, 10, 15 years on projects that are not in blighted areas. And every dollar that we don't collect based on a TIF is a dollar that could go towards, basic services, and, those are property taxes, so also the schools. So I think the Board of Aldermen does really need to take a hard look at the way that they handle TIFs, special taxing districts, community benefit agreements, like the one that we'll likely see if we build an MLS stadium here in town. Because all these things, they're great to encourage development, but we have to make sure that we're not doing development for the sake of development while we leave behind the residents of the city.
Okay. What, if any, reforms would you advocate for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police? And do you support waiving the residency requirements for police new recruits?
So, to improve the police department, I think that that really starts with improving the relationship between the community as a whole and the police department, and I think that is one of the big questions in our region at the moment, is how do we get that done? And one of the ways that I think that it can be done is through increased use of programs like the neighborhood accountability boards, where young nonviolent offenders have to engage in restorative justice rather than just punitive justice through the courts. Essentially, if a young kid vandalizes something, rather than throwing the book at the kid, we would work through the neighborhood accountability board with his victim. Of course, the victim always has to be on board with this. And the kid can do things like mow lawns or shovel snow, or things like that to kind of pay back pay back society for their crimes without ever getting them into the system, and without ever developing that animosity that we see towards law enforcement sometimes. As far as local, having the police come from the city of St. Louis, I am a believer that police officers are members of our community, and that in order to truly police a neighborhood well, that you need to understand that neighborhood and the way to understand that neighborhood is to live around that neighborhood. Then you start to know who the people are, who's a problematic person, who's not a problematic person, who's, maybe kind of a knucklehead if they've been drinking too much. But I think it would be a mistake for the city of St. Louis to kind of import a bunch of folks into the city who don't have ties to the city simply for the sake of policing the residents of the city, because without those ties to the community, I think that there are many folks around, as we've seen in parts of St. Louis County, there are many folks around who begin to view law enforcement then as a sort of occupying army, and that leads to real issues that in the city we have been able to avoid some of those issues, but I think that the residency requirement is something that I'm in favor of.
Okay. So, can you please, so what would you do to ensure representation of marginalized groups? Since you're not really a member of any of the groups running, so like women, being outspoken member of LGBTQIA community, I mean, some of the folks that you're running against are certainly a member of that group, or, older folks trying to stay in their homes in the neighborhood. So you don't belong to any of those. So how can you and how will you represent the best interests of your constituency when it's so diverse, but you're not really one of those groups?
Sure. So, one of the things that I've done just in my life in general is, become a member of the Missouri Bar. And part of the oath that you take every year is to pay particular attention to the needs of kind of underrepresented and sometimes, frankly, downtrodden members of our society. And I think that you do need to pay close attention particularly to kind of super minorities, because they can get run over kind of roughshod without the political machine really even realizing that they're running people over, because the voices are not necessarily raised in government. I think that the way to ensure adequate representation of everybody across the board, from every community, is to make sure that you're out in the community and listening to people. And I think if you're out and listening to people and not just waiting for your opportunity to say something and not just looking to disagree with them for the sake of disagreeing with them, but actually listening to them and taking their viewpoints and opinions into account in every decision-making process, I think that you can adequately represent people from every marginalized community by simply putting the time in to get to know folks, meet folks where they're at, and then do your best to raise their voices up so that their concerns are heard by the government.
Okay. So we had this question submitted, I believe it was something like 6 times. So this is something that is certainly important to a lot of people to have been asked that many times by different folks. So what is your stance on abortion?
Okay.
And how, so I'll have you answer that one first.
I support a woman's right to choose.
Okay. How will you work to protect those seeking an abortion as alderman?
So I feel like it's kind of a cop-out, but, I also understand the limitations of the board. A lot of issues affecting a woman's right to choose come out of Washington, D.C. and Jefferson City. On the Board of Aldermen, there's very few things that the board does that have a serious effect on a woman's right to choose. That being said, one of the things that the board has looked at in the past and should continue to look towards is kind of a halo for people entering Planned Parenthood, so that they don't have to deal with folks, saying nasty things and physically getting in their way. I've heard of people posing as volunteers and leading people then away from Planned Parenthood. And we have to remember that not everyone who goes to Planned Parenthood is seeking an abortion either. There's plenty of reasons that people go to Planned Parenthood just for their kind of reproductive health. But I don't think that they should have to be in any concern for their safety when they do so. And First Amendment rights are paramount in this country. So I'm certainly not saying that anyone who disagrees with a woman's right to have an abortion should shut up or go away or anything like that. But I think that the Supreme Court's been quite clear that reasonable restrictions are acceptable, and I do believe ensuring a clear walkway for folks who are trying to get into Planned Parenthood for whatever it is that they would like to do there. I think that is a reasonable restriction. No one's saying you can't hold up your sign. No one's saying you can't yell whatever you want to yell. They're just saying, can you move 3 feet over and do it? That is something that I think the board absolutely can tackle, and I think that's a real meaningful thing that the board can tackle, that is in kind of the jurisdiction of what the board can get done, and helps folks who are just trying to go about their business.
Okay. So it was the feedback from the Young Dems meeting when all 5 of the 24th Ward candidates were there and answered some questions. And there was a question, the feedback about the question about race relations was basically none of the 24th Ward candidates really did a great job. There were some problematic answers, there were some non-answers, but this was a question that came up many times from your constituents, and we wanted to give everyone an opportunity in a format that you can take as much time as you need. Sure. To kind of go back to that. So what's your plan to improve race relations in St. Louis?
So in St. Louis as a whole, that's been kind of a $1 million question in the region for a long time. I think we need to look back at some of the very basic roots of some of the problems we have. We need to look at redlining. We need to look at the fact that we were a town of segregation for a long time, and then we also suffered from white flight after segregation ended, and so there's a long history of racial issues in this city. It's one of the more segregated cities in the country. I think we're actually second only to Detroit when it comes to segregation. That is something that absolutely should change, and I think that when we look at changing that, it's a human rights issue. Frankly, we talked earlier about school funding, and when we look at how we allocate school funding, that means that some of the poorer neighborhoods on the north side are not getting the same educational opportunities as folks in the central corridor and folks out in the county. And I think that we can't just look at this as a 24th Ward issue or a City of St. Louis issue even. This is really a regional issue, because there are a lot of folks who used to live in the city and then moved out to St. Charles or even further west. And I'm not saying that nobody should move west, but there's a reason that a lot of folks moved west, and it's called white flight. People were leaving because they didn't like the way that their neighbors looked, and they decided to settle down in communities that their neighbors looked exactly like them. And I think that one of the strengths of the city of St. Louis is its diversity. So as far as how do we fix it, there's no single answer to that question. There's not a magic bullet there, I don't think. I think the curve over time is towards our children and our children's children doing better with racial issues. And that certainly is not to say that we can't do better today, but there's not one single thing that we can change. There needs to be change on many, many issues across the board to really develop racial harmony in the region. We frankly need to open up the way that we look at diversity in the city, and we need to ensure that there's hope for every resident and a path to success for every resident. And I know in a lot of neighborhoods you can talk to people, and some of them don't have that hope for the future. And that is a problem, because we can't have children who don't see a brighter tomorrow. And it's frankly one of the issues of our times. And it's something that the light really got shown on in Ferguson, and then with some of the Jason Stockley protests, and there's a lot of hurt in the region when it comes to race. There's a lot of pain, and it's going to take time to undo that pain and to make things right. And like I said, there's not a single thing that we can do, but I think the best way to start is by making sure that we're listening to each other, that we care about each other, and that we're taking things into account that don't just come from us. The idea that this particular ward, the 24th ward, is a 97% white ward. That doesn't mean that anyone representing the 24th ward should only care 3% about the needs of our Black and Asian and Latino constituents. We need to do better.
Okay. So we had several questions about this, and hopefully we are getting all of them in. But do you think that our ward's becoming gentrified? And do you think that gentrification, if you believe that's happening, is affecting the character, safety, or financial benefits for local businesses and the neighbors?
So this is something that I've actually heard a lot of concern from people in the ward here, is, people who chose to settle down here 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and bought a house here and, had a family here, raised kids here. First, some of their kids have a really hard time getting into the market to buy a home, near their family. And then some of the older folks, they are having a hard time keeping their property. So I think in that sense, there is some gentrification by the definition of the word. I think that we have people becoming priced out of their own community. Most of the time when we talk about gentrification, we're talking about gentrification of minority neighborhoods. So this is an interesting ward in that way, that we're talking about the gentrification of a primarily white working class neighborhood. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, the location of the neighborhood itself. The Central Corridor has seen a lot of funding coming in. We got Highway 40, we got the park, we got the zoo. It's a desirable place to live, and the property values they've increased virtually every year for the last 10 years, save this year. They kind of flattened, but I think that that's more of a correction than it is a new trend. But I definitely understand the concerns of gentrification. I think that it's hard to balance that with new development, because you can't across the board be against development. But I know that there were many concerns with the Hibernia, the apartment building going in, that we were going to start seeing apartments that had higher rents than the notes on some of the houses in the region. And what is that going to do when we add 200 some odd new bedrooms in the community, and those bedrooms cost more than some of the older houses in the neighborhood. We are at kind of a generational tipping point in the neighborhood. We're seeing younger folks moving in, and I think that is also a part of it. There's kind of a different feel for what some folks want out of a house now, and those houses are, they're bigger, they're more expensive, they have fancier things in them. But one of the things that I love about this neighborhood is the old kind of working class aesthetic of it, and it would be a shame to see that go away.
Okay. So do you think that how does that impact local businesses? So next question on here kind of is segregation, or is in getting into that, is what plans and increase in development for the business districts in the 24th ward. So obviously there's Clayton Tam, and it's 6 neighborhoods. So
sure.
So how do you think that the future looks like for those businesses in the ward?
So,
and do you have plans in your head of what you would like to help with that?
So I think that part of what needs to happen is we have some older business districts, and some of the buildings in the business districts do need some repair. Right here in Clayton Tam, we can walk down to Clayton, and you can see some of the buildings there. They're old, and some of them haven't been occupied in quite some time, and we're seeing kind of a resurgence in the city of St. Louis, which is great. But along with that, we need to make sure that we are creating new business opportunities for people, and part of that comes with revitalizing some of those business districts. With those new opportunities, you bring better jobs to the area, and especially for people who want to kind of own and operate a business. This is a great place to do it. There's many of the businesses in our business district are owned by folks that live right here in Dogtown and over in Clifton Heights, and that's a huge benefit. I think getting back to the idea that St. Louis is a city of neighborhoods. To get the character and the feel of the neighborhood is paramount, and one way that you do that really well is by being from the neighborhood and living in the neighborhood and doing business in the neighborhood. So I think when it comes to getting the business districts revitalized, again, we need to make sure that we're not handing away TIF money on projects that don't need TIF money. Most of the area is right here in the central corridor, and so we shouldn't be leaving money on the table that should be going to essential services, because I think there are enough folks that want to live here and want to do business here, that we don't need to be handing out major tax incentives for them to do so. We can revitalize the business districts, bring new jobs in, bring quality jobs in, and if we're not handing away TIF money, we're not leaving money on the table, and we're ensuring good services for the folks that do live here.
So we want you to, if you could speak to the relationship and history with the other candidates. So including seeking the endorsement and backing of Terry Powers, our current committee woman, who's also a candidate, as well as Danny Sample, our current committee man, who is also a candidate. And so seeking that endorsement and advisement for running, and kind of then them running against you. So can you speak to that a little bit and how you'll work with them in the future for the 24th Ward, for the people that live here?
Sure. I think that there's a lot of personal history between a lot of the candidates in this race, and there's some of it is not pleasant. Personally, for me, I have a working relationship with everyone who's running. I know Danny and his husband. We have worked together with the 24th Ward Progressive Democrats here. Ms. Powers, I was a member of her previous ward organization. She's now changed things around on that front. But I have a working relationship with her. Lori Cavan, I actually didn't know before this race. I think Lori's great. When I talked to her, I've said, hey, if you're in office, I'm going to call you and say, hey, let's get to work for the 24th Ward. I think she's great. Tom, I didn't know Tom before the race. I've talked to him just a few times. He seems like a pleasant enough guy to me. We haven't had any reason to really bump heads on anything other than we disagree on a couple of nuanced political issues. But I mean that's what we're doing here. So it's really hard to be upset about anyone for that. As far as working with them in the future, one way or another, whether I get elected or not, these are influential leaders in our community, and so we're going to have to work together. And I take pride on my ability to kind of leave the ego at the door and get the work done, because it's not about me, it's about the residents of the 24th Ward and the residents of the city of St. Louis. So if we can't get together, or we can't get something done because we can't get together in the same room without bumping heads, that says a heck of a whole lot more about us than it does our constituents. And I think frankly it means we need to get over ourselves and get to work. It's detrimental to the community for leaders to not be able to get along with each other and to not be able to kind of check the big personalities and the egos at the door for the sake of the greater good.
So there's no animosity or anything from your perspective, having gotten advisement and verbal good, you should do that, great, from either a committee man or committee woman, and then
it was surprising to me. I'll say it was really surprising, but we're playing a tough game here, and politics is a hard thing, and I'll always support everyone's right to file for office and to try and get something done, and I can only assume that they filed later in the race than myself, because they saw something that they disagreed with, or they thought that there was an issue that needed to be tackled in a different way. And that's what we're doing here. This is a democracy, and if at the end of the day either Terry or Danny wins more votes than myself, or Tom or Lori, in any of the field, it's about okay, the people have spoken, and now let's get to work.
All right. So before we get to our last question, we're at Pat's, and why did you choose Pat's? I mean, what are we doing here?
Pat's, I think, is kind of a cornerstone in the community. It's a solid neighborhood bar. I think there's been a lot of room for community involvement, for political discourse, for just community here. It's an old establishment. It's got kind of the traditional Irish pub feel.
And this amazing upstairs that they just redid.
They just redid the upstairs.
Yeah, we definitely want to showcase that. Everybody should host their parties up here for sure.
They should. But I think it's been a great establishment. Joe's been a really gracious host for a lot of things that I guess we have tried to do, it's really nice to have a place where you can kind of go to and get the gossip of the day, and meet people, outside of the confines of your own home, and get out and talk to people where they're at.
Excellent. So everybody come to Pat's. Also, just to clarify what we had said, so Bret was on the 24th Ward Progressive Democrats interim board. So we had a board in order to make our bylaws, and Bret helped. He was the author of those bylaws initially, and we appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And then we elected our new board, our permanent board, in December. So for this year, Bret is no longer, but he was our secretary. So that's what we were referring to. So, last question. If you're elected and are able to accomplish your goals of the time you're in office, how will our ward and the city be different in 10 years? So if you could list specific changes that you hope to accomplish, that would be great.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, we need to increase the level of communications in between our neighborhood associations. I think that community really starts in our neighborhoods, not with our government. I think it starts with neighbors getting together and figuring out solutions to the things that annoy them, whether that's writing a letter to the city's planning board, or getting a group of people together to tell their alderman that the trash trucks aren't coming on time. And when you have a strong neighborhood association, that's great, but not every neighborhood has some of that input. So I think we need to make sure that some of the neighborhoods that don't have as strong community organizations are able to look at some of the models of some other organizations that are working really well, and start to get that real meaningful community input, because I think that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to get the wants, needs, desires, and concerns of the community addressed. That's what government is. So I think that we need to embolden those neighborhood associations to really get out and work more closely with local government. I think that we also need to make sure that our airport stays in the hands of the city rather than being privatized. We've seen, frankly, disastrous results with privatization in some other places. You don't need to look much further than Flint's water. Flint's been without clean water for far too long. We look at Chicago's parking. They privatize things for a one-time cash infusion, and without fail, it seems that when you privatize and get that cash infusion, the cash is gone before everything that people were trying to accomplish with that cash is accomplished, and then you're left with another hole in your revenue stream. I think we need to work towards getting MLS in town here. I think that'd be a good tax base, and with it, in other cities like Nashville and Cincinnati, we've seen community benefit agreements to ensure that the workers in the stadium get $15 an hour, that they support affordable housing, that they're paying their fair share, and we need to look towards expanding our neighborhood accountability boards that I discussed a little bit previously. I think that I'd like to also see the city embrace some technological advancements that we've had over the last few years. There's a whole new technology called smart city lighting. We have light poles, every 150 feet in the city, and there's amazing things that they can do now with these lighting systems, whether it's the shot spotter technology that we currently have, but I know there's some issues there. There's ways to address parking with this technology. There's Wi-Fi. You can put Wi-Fi in our parks or in our in neighborhoods that don't have high internet access. But ultimately, I think that this region is going to look very different in 10 years, regardless of who wins this election, because we're also looking at ward reduction, and we're looking at Better Together's plan for a city-county merger. And now, I think just this morning, there was another plan put forward for city-county merger, I believe coming out of Chesterfield. I think they're looking towards the Missouri Constitution for their merger plan. And I don't know the details of either of those yet because the details aren't public, but I think that there's almost a 100% possibility that we're looking at a very different 24th Ward and City of St. Louis 5 or 10 years out, because when we go through ward reduction, that's going to be a real fight for people to ensure that the voices of their communities are adequately represented, and we're going to have a fight coming from every ward in the city. I think, because I think any alderperson worth their salt is going to try their darndest to make sure that the voices of their constituents are heard in that process, and it's going to be a long, arduous process, I think, in determining where those lines are drawn. And it may all be for nothing if we go through that and then city-county merger goes through. But either way, we need to fight like heck for our people. But when you look at what the region is going to look like 5 or 10 years from now, I'm hoping that we're going to see a region that has fixed some of the issues with its schooling, a region that maintains its key assets, a region that is pulling resources into the region, like an MLS stadium, and becomes more of a destination. We have one of the greatest parks in the world is across the street from where we're sitting, and the fact that we're unable to kind of capitalize on some of the tourism dollars that I think we should be seeing with the zoo, the park, the art museum. We can do better on some of these issues, but we have to move forward as a region in order to do that. And so I think the soul of the region is at play right now, and I think the next 5 or 10 years are going to be key for what we want to do here. Whether we're going to see more folks moving out of St. Louis to greener pastures, whether it be over across the river in Illinois or out in West County, because they say, well, I love the city, but, then I had kids and, had to go somewhere else for the schooling. Or whether we're going to be able to grab the bull by the horns and tackle some of these problems and say, no, this is ours and this is where we live. And if there's a problem, we're going to fix it. And I'm not going anywhere because this is my home. And I'm hoping that if I know St. Louis like I know St. Louis, that there's going to be enough people willing to grab the bull by the horns and get the job done, even if it means, not getting the credit that you think you get or that you think you should get, or, frankly, there's going to be some folks who probably need to legislate themselves out of jobs. And I think that people need to make sure that they're putting the needs of their constituents and the region ahead of a vanity project, And so I think if we can do that, if we can elect leaders who care about the people in their community and the community itself, then I think in 5 or 10 years we're going to have a vibrant, happy, healthy city.
All right. Well, that's all we have.
Great.
So thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Anytime.
We